Hi, Dr. Carol Blaney here. Today I'd like to go over a chapter in a book I wrote called Aspie's Guide to Planet Earth. In the chapter on Brain Design 101, some of the research on the Asperger's brain. I would like to discuss 3 misnomers when it comes to the Asperger mind. Neurotypicals will typically have trouble studying the ways of the Asperger, so the Asperger must realize that the neurotypical can't help this. As I explained before, the neurotypicals have a lot of pre-installed software, which is a great hindrance in understanding other neurotypes. So it's the Asperger's job, the Asperger who has a more open mind, to study the neurotypical brain instead, and to study the neurotypical culture, regardless of whether the neurotypical studies your culture. The Asperger must be the one to bridge the gap. When Aspergers are operating in a neurotypical society, which you are, you might notice that the outdated doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists refer to ADD, ADHD, autism, Asperger's, and other individuals as having a disorder. But that is often a misnomer caused by ignorance. This in turn arises because the neurotypical has failed to systematize properly. In fact, the only actual disorder might be the Asperger's or the ADD's or whoever's failure to study and understand the neurotypical brain. The Asperger specifically must study the culture in which he or she is surrounded. Returning now to the views of the neurotypical doctors and psychotherapists, some will say that Asperger's have a trio of so-called disorders. This is a misnomer. The first misnomer is called misfiring, the second, miswiring, and the third is misregulation. It's very, very important that I address this grave misnomer that these are disorders. They are not disorders. First of all, the Asperger brains do not have a misfiring disorder. Rather, the Asperger's synapses are, by design, more activatable. And in fact, if you're an Asperger's, all the senses throughout your entire nervous system are equally fine-tuned for deciphering the subtlety of details in incoming data. Asperger's wiring is suited first and foremost for data detection, data analysis, and problem solving. These more easily activated synaptic junctions are a benefit and a skill. A benefit because they keep your computational power low. You don't want your brain to overheat with such high processing speeds, nor do you want to run out of glucose fuel. With a specialized nervous system such as in the Asperger's, the Aspie must have optimum environmental conditions for their fancy machinery to work at optimum levels. Aspies work best in quiet, non-threatening, and non-distracting environments. Don't expect to be able to think clearly if you're an Asperger's in a crowded classroom or a polluted city. Save your physics homework and your chemistry homework for quiet classrooms, quiet libraries, out in nature, or in your private bedroom. Secondly, the Aspie brain doesn't have a miswiring disorder. That's a misnomer. It's not a disorder. The Asperger's wiring is by design more suited to non-conventional, out-of-the-box thinking. Consider each brain compartment in the human brain. For example, the Asperger has one brain compartment for visual processing, one brain compartment for speech processing, other brain compartments for smell, language, thinking, learning, and so forth. How do these compartments communicate with one another? Through synaptic connections, and a lot of them. Now, the neurotypical brain has these same brain compartments, but has very few synaptic connections between these compartments, and it leaves most of the processing to each individual compartment. On the other hand, the Asperger's brain has an order of magnitude or more connecting pathways between each compartment. That is, you have more synaptic connections between brain regions. Take, for example, synesthesia. where one has overlapping sensory perceptions. If you're a synesthete, you may have overlap between smell and colors, or colors and numbers. This is common in Asperger's because there are more interconnections between brain compartments, which can give sensory overlap. This goes a long way in helping Asperger's find new and unobvious solutions to problems. If you have a solution in one system, you can easily apply it to another system, and it helps you find similarities in seemingly unrelated phenomenon. The third misnomer will be covered next. The Asperger brain does not have a misregulation disorder. That's a misnomer. Rather, the Asperger brain has less amplitude in its synaptic signaling in the thinking portion of the brain. So, the Asperger's thinking ability is naturally disrupted more in chaotic environments. For example, you're an Asperger, and your thinking part of the brain has slightly less amplitude in the nerve impulses compared to the baseline neurotypical brain. If the Asperger's neighboring brain regions, for example, the amygdala, becomes overactive, say if the amygdala happens to be caught in a fight or flight reaction, then the thinking part of the brain can lose its resonant firing patterns more easily as it's hijacked by the amygdala's strong, high amplitude fight or flight patterns. To the higher thinking part of the brain, the amygdala has a fight or flight pattern that is chaotic and disruptive. Therefore, the higher thinking part of the brain can't do its higher order thinking. It would be like if you heard explosions, you wouldn't exactly be able to recite poetry. Well, to further explain, let's say you're an Aspie and you're in physics class, and the teacher has decided to torture you because you were found skipping class the day before. You have to work the hardest problem on the blackboard in front of everyone. While it may not be a hard problem to you, you do have to do it on the fly because you haven't done it yet, because you missed the previous day. The most difficult part of the problem, the teacher yells loudly in a shrill voice that you're taking too long. So you feel threatened. Not only do your ears hurt from the shrill voice with physical pain, but any Asperger would feel crummy when this happens. Then your overactive amygdala begins to fire like a siren. Well, says your amygdala to your prefrontal cortex, sorry neighbor, I know I'm disturbing your higher order thoughts and making it impossible to you to finish that physics problem, but I'm about to fight this darn teacher and I can't do it anymore quietly. So you get the picture. You need a quiet and safe environment to work in and think in. Loud or crowded places will disrupt your coherent thoughts. You Aspergers are not designed to think on your feet in crowded rooms. Rather, you're meant to think deeply in quiet places, in nature, for example. The quiescence of nature is the perfect primer for your brains to do excellent work, you Aspies. Naturally, if you Aspies entertain certain environments with chaotic electromagnetic fields, be it from electrical equipment, thunderstorms, or from nearby humans that emit chaotic bioelectric field emissions from their heartbeats mostly, you will find your sensitive synapses trying to resonate with too many things at once. The result is always going to feel like inner chaos. The solution is to go out in nature, preferably alone, and resonate with the Earth's Schumann resonance frequency. This quiets the mind and primes the Aspie for thinking coherent and useful thoughts. It is there in nature that your brain will do its magic. Imagine a balmy breeze blowing across your face and shoulders. Take a deep breath. As you hear a lone bluebird sing a beautiful song among the rustle of the leaves blowing overhead. Now, the Asperger brain is bigger than the neurotypical's brain, but not so big as to strain the neck muscles, and not so big as to look outlandish. Nevertheless, you can only cram so much software into the brain. That's why the Asperger doesn't have all the pre-programmed software that the neurotypical has. So the Asperger brain is large enough to have the extra programming capacity and storage capacity, which is necessary to accomplish high-end problem solving. In order to make room for these advantages, some of the pre-installed software that exists in the neurotypicals does not exist in the Asperger's brain. And that is why the Aspie has to work hard to learn manners and the neurotypical social structure. Take, for example, caretaking roles. The female Asperger will certainly be an excellent mother if she chooses the path of motherhood. All of your caretaking instincts are fully intact. You automatically protect your child fiercely and probably do a great job raising your child properly, holding, loving, caring for your child, feeding him the proper foods, and taking care of him or her and so forth. But when it comes to being a caretaker for all your friends, colleagues, and bosses, well, is it really optimal for all women to be caretakers for the planet Earth? Or might we allow a small percentage of women, the Asperger females, to be more like males when it comes to the caretaking roles? You don't have to take care of anyone and everyone around you at all times, female Aspies. Occasionally, men do take care of others, but it's more of a learned behavior. With women, neurotypicals, it's more of an automatic reaction. But Asperger women don't necessarily have this automatic desire to help others and bring them coffee, for example. And so that pre-installed neurotypical program is not installed in the female Asperger for the most part. Besides, the Help Everyone program does use a lot of time and energy, so it really is more efficient from a problem-solving point of view for the Aspie woman not to have that pre-programmed software. This allows time and energy for solving problems. Asperger females tend to shift their passions and energies towards getting good at their craft and skill, towards following their innate interests, towards seeking to learn as much as their heart desires, and finally towards using their skills and talents to help our planet Earth survive, while caring for their own children and family, but not necessarily everyone else's. Asperger women will certainly be able to have friends and date and marry, of course. You definitely will feel love, at least as much as the neurotypical, if not more. And I say at least because you may feel it a lot more since your nervous system is so fine-tuned. In fact, you may be overwhelmed with emotion at times. The Help Everyone program, pre-installed in the neurotypicals, is a form of automatic empathy. It is especially prominent in the neurotypical females. It is a wonderful program that has helped the human race survive for millennia. And in a crisis, small or large, the females typically help everyone around them automatically. There are plenty of neurotypical females with this trait, so as I said earlier, the Asperger females don't all need to have it. But let's look more closely at what empathy really is. Let's look at the biological progression of events that lead to helping another human being. What happens first? Well, first, if you're going to help another human being, first you see the other person. Next, you feel the other person's emotions in your own body with your mirror neurons. Third, you care about the other person and you want to help them. And four, you actually help them. The first step, seeing the person, goes something like this. Using your eyes, you look at the person with lucid clarity and you see their face. Are they sad? Are they happy? Are they anxious? Are they angry? Are they flashing a micro-expression that reveals a hidden emotion, such as disgust? What about their eyes? Wide, squinted? Are the pupils dilated? What about their posture? Are they tense, fidgeting, scratching their nose, tapping their foot? All of these body languages signal and tell you what the neurotypical is feeling, but only if they're wired in the neurotypical way. If they are, you can usually tell if they're lying. You can tell if they're hiding an emotion. You can tell if they like what they're looking at, if they want to leave or stay. You can tell if they're stressed or relaxed. Each emotion has a link to the body's actions for the neurotypical. And for neurotypicals, this wiring is more or less the same, but not always. Generally the same, but not always. Certain childhood traumas and injuries and other occurrences can alter these signals, and so then their reactions may not be as typical. If you take a class on body language, when you arrive on planet Earth, they will teach you the body language classes of neurotypicals. Some of it may relate to Asperger's, but not all. Still, it's very powerful knowledge since 90% of the human race is neurotypical. If you want to tell what an emotion someone is feeling, and if you're able to do it well, you have what's called cognitive empathy. Most neurotypical brains have this software pre-installed. Asperger's have it installed to varying degrees, some more than others. Cognitive empathy can be learned, certainly, but a big part of the training is just to discipline yourself to actually look into the eyes and at the body language of another person, to be keenly aware of their body language. Most Aspies are so overwhelmed with the hum of flickering lights and all the emotions around them that they develop a habit of looking at their feet to reduce the sensory input into their overwhelmed brains. This is because their filter is so wide open that they often let in too much sensory information. When it comes to expressing the skills of cognitive empathy, however, looking at your feet just won't do. Of course, it'll be your decision whether you want to look at the eyes and the body language of another person when you're with them. No one can force you to look at the face of someone to see what their emotions are. And if you are overwhelmed, perhaps you should look at your feet, if that keeps you from having a meltdown from sensory overload. If you don't know whether a person is neurotypical or Asperger, you must be careful so that you don't misread their body language. For example, if a neurotypical taps his foot, he's impatient. If an Aspie taps his or her foot, it often just means they're experiencing sensory overload. This is something neurotypicals have trouble understanding. Thus, the Asperger, needs to go out in nature to reset their brainwave firing patterns so that she can regain a calmer state. If the Asperger cannot go out in nature, then tapping the foot or rocking back and forth or some other rhythmic movement called stimming acts to soothe and calm the Asperger by helping their brains and neurons reset to a coherent and pleasing firing pattern. Earth psychologists that are neurotypicals typically call this motion stimming, S-T-I-M-M-I-N-G. They call it this because they believe mistakenly that it stimulates the Asperger. However, in actuality, it doesn't exactly stimulate the Asperger. Rather, it mimics the Earth's natural Schumann resonance frequency, which is the Asperger's favorite frequency in which to fire his or her neurons synchronously. This frequency is attained when you rapidly flap your hands or tap your feet. The vibrations you set up when you stim at this frequency help your brain to resonate at that Schumann frequency. This phenomenon, resonating with the local frequency coming from outside your own body or created by your hands, is called entrainment. When the Asperger stims other ways, say by rocking back and forth in his or her chair or on a meditation cushion, this is a slower vibratory rate, perhaps around 4 cycles per second instead of 8. This is another indigo Asperger favorite because it mimics the theta brainwave frequency, which Aspergers are very happy to be in. You see, the theta brainwave frequencies are the range of frequencies created when a person is being creative, having amazing thoughts, or seeing hypnagogic images, such as when you're drifting off to sleep. Aspergers love to do this, and they were designed to do it extremely well. These brainwave frequencies are crucial for solving tough, unsolvable problems. So now we know what cognitive empathy is, which is only the first step of the entire 4-step empathetic sequence, resulting in helping other sentient beings. But just reading someone's emotions doesn't mean you care about them or that you will help them. There are 3 more steps. Please note that when it comes to reading people's body language using cognitive empathy, the psychopath has honed this skill, and they regularly use it to read your innermost fears and desires, and then they sadly manipulate you to their own ends. Thus, this so-called cognitive empathy can be used for good as well as for evil. Something very interesting about the psychopath is this. They may have a keen skill at reading and manipulating others, but it comes with a payoff. The psychopath has honed this skill over his lifetime, and as a result, his brain has neuroplastically developed a lot of white matter surrounding the brain, which helps with the task. But because he's dedicated so much of his limited cranial volume to this white matter, he has considerably less gray matter. Said in a simpler way, he's rather stupid. Sooner or later, people will figure out he's a psychopath because he never follows up on his promises, or he tricks you, or he stabs you in the back. One too many times. A word of warning. Aspergers are very easy targets for psychopaths because of their pure and innocent, well-meaning Asperger mind. They can't really fathom such an evil brain. It's often not in their realm of possibility. They can't fathom the psychopath. So Aspies, be careful out there. I'm here to warn you of the danger of the psychopathic neurotype. And this is a danger. You must avoid it. Well, what happens after step 1, cognitive empathy? The next 3 steps form something called affective empathy, in which you are able to feel a person's emotion, care enough to help them, and finally, actually help them. Aspergers often have a very, very high level of affective empathy. This is because if you're an Asperger, your neural systems can very easily resonate with another's, sometimes too much, so you can readily feel the emotions of another. Many Aspergers have a high level of mirror neurons, which are extremely sensitive and very easily resonate with others. Because of the way you're wired, you care deeply about helping the entire planet as well as individuals and human beings, be they human or other animals. So in our 4-step sequence, step 2 is feeling the person's emotions. Step 3 is actually caring about the sentient being. And perhaps the very best skill you Aspergers possess is 4, in which you actually help the individual. To do this, you first must calm yourself. Get your mind receptive. Think about the problem. Research it. Look at it from all angles. You may talk about it. You may even collaborate with others on the problem. And then you work on solving the problem for the other person or the planet. Step 4 is the act of offering real, tangible help. Aspergers have more passion and drive towards step 4 than any other neurotype on planet Earth. So if an Asperger lacks cognitive empathy skills, he or she makes up for it in their high level of affective empathy, which is the key motivating factor that Aspergers need to have to help save planet Earth from an early demise. And boy, do they have it. So in summary then, the Asperger brain has more of the better kind of empathy, which is a conscious empathy, a moral empathy, and he or she has it in higher amounts. It's not completely automatic, but it's conscious. During every phase of step 2, feeling, step 3, caring, and step 4, helping, you're highly conscious of every thought and feeling that you have, if you're an Asperger. It's not automatic, but conscious. This is here for you to fulfill your duties that you have for your lifetime. Affective empathy is different from cognitive empathy. And Aspergers have a lot of affective empathy, whereas neurotypicals have more of the cognitive empathy, unless the Asperger trains himself to read the body language of the neurotypicals. For the last 2 minutes of my lecture today, I would like to focus on passion, the driving force that comes from the limbic portion of the brain. The limbic brain, or the emotional brain, is driven strongly by dopamine. Its effect is felt as a pleasurable and passionate drive to act. The opposite of that, low dopamine, gives the feeling of being sad, repulsed, and having an aversion. The neurotypical's limbic brain is pre-wired to express high levels of passionate drive to several functions. These functions are well suited to primate survival, such as the female predominant passion towards the function of caretaking and helping everyone, and the male predominant passion towards the function of sex drive, power drive, and so forth. On the other hand, for the Asperger brain, some of these passionate neural pathways are rewired to other activities, such as the pursuit of knowledge, the function of systematization, the function of problem solving, and of helping entire ecosystems survive, and of creating beauty in gardens, art, music, and so forth. Sometimes towards teaching truth and awakening. The Asperger's passionate drives are aimed towards the greater good. This is a very important phenotype that neurotypicals often lack, but it's very important for the survival of the human race. Now, you Aspergers will certainly have enough remaining neural pathways for the caretaking roles and for power and sex drive, but you will have a significant portion of your neural pathways rooted towards the passionate drive to the greater good. So this ends my lecture on Brain Design 101, which is a chapter in my book, Aspie's Guide to Planet Earth. Thank you for letting me share these thoughts with you, which are the result of my research on reading papers in the last few years on Asperger brain research. If you like this video, please subscribe and like, and have a great day. Peace, everybody.